And I asked, how can this be such a crime when we come to the border and ask if our papers are appropriate? If there's not appropriate, then let us go back and retrieve what we need to get. And so she said she had just done what she was ordered to do. And I told her that several acquaintances have passed through here in the last several weeks, and they had been kindly ushered back to go and get the appropriate tests required. So I knew that they had been very generous with some people. Well, those were their situations, and this was our situation. They said we had violated by stepping across the boundary. That's where we had made the crime. But even approaching the door was the crime. To spend $17,000 in fine just because a test is not appropriate doesn't seem reasonable. Then she calmly and confidently said, this is how I treat all the travelers who come from Belize. And I'm like, this is time for me to stop arguing, because if I do anything else than ask me any more questions, I'm sure she will call the cops on us. Yeah. But the way she was discriminating the fact that if it's from Belize, this is how I treat them.
They came to the border with everything that they needed to. In my view, this ticket was issued quickly and without considering the facts of the case. After communication with Crown, it was very obvious that this ticket never should have been entered.
Friends, I think we could use a little bit of good news these days, right? We live all of a sudden in a society plagued by government medical segregation. Businesses are following along, and I feel like we need a little bit of a win. So do I ever have one to tell you about today? Ed and Greta Dueck are Canadian citizens. They're married, and they live now in Belize. But they received $17,000 in pandemic tickets for just trying to come home to Manitoba to visit Greta's mother, who at the time was dying. They had done everything right. The Duecks had planned their trip in advance. They had gotten a PCR test that was valid within 72 hours before they tried to cross the border. And they had a plan to isolate once they got into Canada. And yet, when the Duecks got to the border, things went sideways almost immediately. It appears as though they ran into health officials and border agents who either really didn't know what was going on or understand what the rules were at the time, or maybe these officials were applying those rules unfairly and inconsistently. Either way, we were able to help them here at Rebel News through your generous crowdfunding donations to our civil liberties project, fightthefines.com, where in partnership with all of you at home and through the registered Canadian charity, the Democracy Fund, we've been putting people, just like the Duecks, people slapped with enormous lockdown tickets or quarantine tickets, in touch with top criminal lawyers and civil litigators at no cost to them. And I am so glad for it, because we were able to help this family, a family experiencing a crisis when they needed our help the most. So first, let's hear from Ed, who is in beautiful Belize. Then we're going to hear from the Duecks lawyer, Stephen Whitehead. And then I'm going to ask you to do this again to help us keep the wins rolling in. Here's Ed.
Me and my wife, Greta, we are living in Belize, Central America, with our family. All our children were born in Canada. So it was a great desire for us to go back to visit Greta's parents. And hearing that they were both going through some severe health struggles, we decided that it was time to go and visit them. And we had actually planned to go up with the whole family in August for a family event. But then the traveling restrictions kept us from doing so. We canceled the whole program. And eventually we heard that our parents were doing so bad that we decided it's time for us to go and visit them. And so regardless, if we would have to quarantine for 2 weeks, we decided it was better to go than to stay any longer. So we took all the appropriate actions to take the test that was needed. We researched what is it required in order for us to enter Canada. And so we made our way up. And so we decided, we were debating whether we should fly or we should just fly to Fargo and then drive from there. And so with all the research that we did and others who had been traveling through, we understood that it was a possible thing, but could be difficult. So with all the appropriate actions, we decided it should work. So we bought tickets to fly into Fargo. And the sad thing was that when we reached Houston, that's when we heard the sad news that Greta's mom was actually passing away. So it was all the more sad to continue the journey and to know that we still had a border to cross that gave us a lot of concerns. But we moved forward. We figured it was the thing to do. And it so happened that instead of taking a taxi from Fargo, it happened that Greta's brother was traveling through, who is a business person doing a lot of travel into the US for business reasons. He said he would be in Fargo that night to pick us up and he would drive us into Canada. So that was a huge relief. So upon reaching the border, we submitted our passports and they also asked for tests and we submitted those. And then he made some comment about the tests as if not appropriate. And I asked him, this is a PCR, right? So it is matching your requirements. And he didn't say much in detail. And with a few more questions, he eventually ushered us forward. We should go and park and then go walk inside. And so there we've spent a good 3+ hours waiting at the border, and we were being interviewed by the health agents. And without more explanation, they said we should wait for a little longer. They would finish up some details. And when they returned, they said, here was a fine, a pink slip that showed $8,550 each for me and another one for Greta, both having the same amount. And we pleaded with them, could we go back? Or if this is what it takes, then we want to just simply grab our bags and walk back into the US. And even though mom had passed away, we'd rather walk back than to face such a horrible situation where we would be considered such criminals for trying to come into Canada, both having our Canadian passports, and we've lived in Canada 15 years. All our children were born there. And to find such a welcome into Canada was unbelievable. And so we walked out of the room, out of that the meeting room, and we met the same officer at the counter that had been at the window when we drove up. And this officer, I asked him if there was any chance for us to just go back instead of going in, because we knew that my wife's sister had asked to pass through the night before from Oklahoma, and they had been friendly ushered back into the US to go and retrieve the proper test because they only had a rapid test. That we knew that wouldn't have sufficed, but they hadn't researched it enough. So they were sweetly, kindly ushered back into the US to go and retrieve their test. So we figured we couldn't understand how this was such a crime when they were being so friendly to people who didn't understand what the details were. So long story short, they said if we needed any more explanation, they would call the RCMP to explain the rest to us. So we were like, so we're already in prison. That's how it felt. It felt like we were already a prisoner, and we just had a few more options left. There was no chance for us to go back to Belize. It's like the bars were closed behind us. We had no options. We were supposed to go to our quarantine position and be locked away kind of mentality. We didn't have the option of going back. So it was like the bars were closed, and if you need help, any further questioning, then RCMP will take care of the rest of it. So we proceeded. And fortunately, parents had a lot right next to them that they had purchased and put on a trailer, so we could at least quarantine right adjacent to them and stay close. But this was such a shock for us. It felt like we had placed ourselves into a prison with so many threats that the police will be out looking for you if need be. They will be making sure that you're quarantining, and Health Canada will be keep calling you to make sure that everything is fine. And like the whole thing, it was so shocking to find out that this is our land of the free Canada that we had loved and appreciated all these years, and to go and to meet our family and telling them that according to the restrictions, we will not be able to come close. But nonetheless, when I pleaded if we could rather go back at the border, then eventually the health officer herself came out to listen in on the conversation that I had, and I tried to stay in low key, calm, just reassuring me, ask certain questions. And then she introduced herself as the chief health officer. And I asked, how can this be such a crime when we come to the border and ask if our papers are appropriate? If there's not appropriate, then let us go back and retrieve what we need to get. And so she said she had just done what she was ordered to do. And I told her that several acquaintances have passed through here in the last several weeks, and they had been kindly ushered back to go and get the appropriate tests required. So I knew that they had been very generous with some people. Well, those were their situations, and this was our situation. I was like, how can you do that to some and then say there's no option for you to be gentle and kind to somebody who comes to the border? They said we had violated by stepping across the boundary. That's where we had made the crime. But even approaching the door was the crime, not where we were at right now. So it stunned us, and we were told that this is a fate. Then I asked, so if you let some people through, how come you don't let others go back and get the right test? Because to spend $17,000 in fine just because a test is not appropriate doesn't seem reasonable. Then she calmly and confidently said, this is how I treat all the travelers who come from Belize. And I'm like, this is time for me to stop arguing, because if I do anything else than asking any more questions, I'm sure she will call the cops on us. But the way she was discriminating the fact that if it's from Belize, this is how I treat them. Me and my wife were both shocked that this was actually what we're hearing. So actually the officer who had been at the window, he was the third person that was listening in on the way she was discriminating Belizeans trying to come. Travelers from Belize that would try to come into Canada. And I asked, isn't this an appropriate test? He said, yes. Other travelers who had taken the same test from the same clinic, from the same place in Belize, they traveled into Toronto by plane, and everything worked fine. So there's nothing wrong with the test, and we were still within 72 hours of the original test date. So therefore that was all considered okay. Like, this is what the court also justified, saying that our tests were still within the validation period. So therefore they waived it, which we're so thankful and so grateful that Rebel News was willing to handle this for us. We were so blown away by the generosity of Rebel News. I couldn't fathom such generosity, that people, friends who would crowdfund such a support, such a huge thank you. And I asked friends before, what should I do? And they introduced me to Rebel News. So thank you heartily. We are so blown away by such kindness and generosity that you're able to reach out to people like this, because we were in such shock. The grief of mom passing away, dad was slowly recovering, and he's doing fine today. But to have Rebel News there to stand up and support people who are in such shock that they don't know what to do. Thank you heartily.
Now let's hear from Stephen Whitehead from the law firm of Gray, Wauch, Spencer. Take a listen.
This is another piece of good news we have. And frankly, as an aside, I love cases like this, because we do have a lot of people traveling in couples, and then they get pulled aside together. So they're kind of, in a situation where they have to face this together. But it's really easy for us as lawyers, because we have two cases with the facts following the same kind of trail rather. And so in any event, they came to the border with everything that they needed to. In my view, this ticket was issued quickly and without considering the facts of the case. After communication with Crown, it was very obvious that this ticket never should have been entered, and we got it stayed. So, a piece of good news.
Friends at home, when you donate to fightthefines.com or the Democracy Fund, this is the difference that you're making in someone's life. The people you help are just so grateful for it, and I'm grateful too that through you I'm able to offer people some help on what is often the very worst day of their lives. To help us continue to provide help for the approximately 2,200 other people receiving access to the legal system, it's really easy. Just go to fightthefines.com. Thank you. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. if you'd like to help us continue to provide access to justice for the approximately 2,200 people being helped through fightthefines.com. It's really easy. Just go to fightthefines.com and make a donation. And good news, because all of your donations there now qualify for a charitable tax receipt through our partnership with the registered Canadian charity, the Democracy Fund.